Thank you, all of you, for making this possible. This is very exciting for me, and I really appreciate opportunities like this. I've had them throughout my career, and it's really people like me live for this. Since I was very young, I was very interested in specifically and particularly in making kinetic sculpture, things that would move in the wind. Simply because, in my judgment, that is magic. A still sculpture is satisfying, and you move around it and you enjoy it. But if it moves, it really adds something that I think is worth doing, trying to explore. And so, starting out doing this, my challenge was trying to figure out how to make things that would move and move very beautifully and effortlessly, and also hold up in extreme conditions and last a long time. And so that's kind of been the challenge of my life, pretty much. And at this point, I'm pretty confident, and I've kind of figured it out. But again, I keep changing and trying new stuff. I'm sort of bringing that up because this sculpture was one of the first sort of big pieces that involved some pretty serious engineering that I built. This was in 1990. It was actually, I just made this for a show of kinetic sculpture that was at UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara, in 1990. And it was a big group show where there was a lot of sculpture by a lot of different artists, some of whom were very major people like George Rickey and Jean Tinguely. And so it was a real feather in my cap to be asked to participate. So this was just a temporary thing, and they just gave me this wall and said, here's a wall for you, see what you can do. So these pieces spin all around, all individually, and in planes parallel to the wall. And then obviously the shadows are a big part of this sculpture. And ultimately, I gave this piece to the university. They recently took it all down and fixed it up, and it looks great. This is kind of a different thing. This was a percent for art piece that I did. I got picked to enter I was on a short list for a project in Phoenix. They had a very active percent for art program. I think they still do. I'm not really that up on it now, but I did this in '92, and this piece is a sculpture at a wastewater plant west of Phoenix, and they were looking for something that would be interesting and fun, particularly for school kids who come to tour the plant and learn about wastewater treatment. And they also offered some parts old parts from the plant if I wanted them. And so I used, in the bottom of the sculpture, there are some things from the plant, and throughout the piece there are sort of found objects that I incorporated into the sculpture. And water flows all through it, and things turn, and all sorts of stuff happens. I wanted this to be lit at night, and there was no power available. Thank you very much. There was no power available at this spot with our budget, and so I decided to just put solar panels, make solar panels and solar power part of the sculpture, which in '92 was pretty ahead, I'd say. And now this was sort of the first of a series of pieces that I've done where I sort of make a colonnade, a kind of space in a plaza, and then on top of the columns I have towers that are adorned on top of the towers with kinetic moving elements. In this case, it was sort of a twins theme. And it's a very interesting thing when you make two things that are virtually identical and you put them together, and then you introduce wind and nature, and they move, but they don't really do the same thing, but they kind of do the same thing. And it really becomes very interesting to watch how they sort of relate to each other and how you sort of make them relate to each other in your mind. This was a piece, this piece was in Denver, Colorado, and it was actually a shopping center that was built in the middle 90s. And one of the sort of things about this shopping center was that they wanted to have public art in the shopping center, although it was funded by the developer. And they chose, I think, maybe 6 different things that are in the shopping center, and I was one of the artists. This piece, this is sort of an example of work like the piece I brought here. This is something that was not site-specific in particular, although I did create this to show. This was a show in Chicago at Navy Pier, and we had for about 4 or 5 years we had annual shows on Navy Pier that were really interesting, and they attracted sculptors from all over. And really, this has a lot to do with why I'm here now, because Jim Gallucci, your own fabulous sculptor, who's right here in Greensboro, showed his work at this show in Navy Pier, and that's how I met him, and he was who suggested that you look at my work for this. But this particular piece I made. There was a lot of building demolition going on in Chicago at the time, and I salvaged a lot of stuff. The whole structure of this sculpture is made out of salvaged rebar. So then they tear down concrete buildings, they munch up all the concrete and pull out the rebar and separate it and reuse it. And so this was I built that all out of spent rebar. And then the columns are old 16-inch square posts from a warehouse that's probably southern yellow pine from down here that was made into a warehouse in Chicago in the 1890s or something. And then, I sort of put all those things together, and the wash tubs, which are capitals, also hold soil, and there were plants growing out of that. And the kinetic piece on top is something that moves in the wind like a weather vane, a little bit like the piece I brought. And ultimately, this piece was acquired by the city of Green Bay. And that's a view up the center. I'm really interested in geometry, and I try to be thoughtful about things like that. This was a commission I did this was one of 3 commissions I've done for universities in Illinois through a program in Illinois, which is a Percent for Art program, which is restricted to Illinois artists, which maybe isn't fair, but if you live in Illinois, it works for me. Believe me, there's plenty of times when I didn't get picked because I was from Chicago and the thing was somewhere else. But this was a new college of engineering at Northern Illinois University at DeKalb, and they actually got 2 big sculptures. Another one on the other side of the building by another sculptor, and this piece by me. And this is a very dynamic piece that has all kinds of compound curving geometry, and it moves in a almost crazy fashion. And that was in 98. And very simple, clean. Pretty big. This the mast on this piece is 28 feet off the ground, so it's a fairly big piece. It takes some engineering to get, and this thing has survived some really hairy weather. There have been microbursts recorded in near here, like within probably some hundreds of meters of here, that were well over 100 miles an hour. This is just a sort of a piece to show you some variety. This is something a little bit like the piece I brought today. And for a while, I was making pieces like this that I could move easily on my pickup truck and set up without a crane, with just a few guys and an eager woman with a sandwich. And I've shown these pieces all over in Sarasota, Florida, all over the Southeast. I don't do it so much now because I don't really have time like I used to. This is the piece that was mentioned called The Crossing. This was also a commission from the state of Illinois at another university in southern Illinois at Edwardsville. And in this case, this was a competition, and one of the things that was suggested was, or pointed out, was that the sculpture is going, the 90th meridian runs through the campus. And the sculpture will be sited directly on the 90th meridian. So what can we, how can we relate to the 90th meridian? And it's pretty arbitrary, seeing as how 0 is in Greenwich, because that's what the king said. And then you just count from there, right? So this is exactly 90 degrees away from Greenwich, 6 hours. But it goes through campus, and just south of here is a Buckminster Fuller dome, which is also on the 90th meridian, and it has a geodesic glass roof that has a map of the world, and it's pretty cool. So what I did was I decided to do a shadow alignment feature, and this sculpture, it's kind of hard to see, but in between the two columns, sort of in the back, there's a disc, and a steel disc, and that has a slot in it, and it casts a shadow. And what happens is, here's a little view again of fabulous I love geometry. That was tricky. So what I did was I sighted this piece. Obviously, it's on the 90th meridian, and there's a line that represents the 90th meridian that's going north-south through the center of the pavilion. And so this photo is taken with that disc sort of over our heads, and we're facing north. And so you see the S at the bottom, and there's an N at the other end. And every day at solar noon, the sculpture casts a shadow on the floor of the pavilion, and there it is, and that is the summer solstice shadow. And then you see those bronze strips, so there's a gap in the strips, and that lines up with where the shadow is for the solstice. And then as the season changes, the shadow moves across, and in December, the shadow is all the way at the other end. And then a big part of this is the geometry and how it all looks on the surface. This was really tricky because it had to be laid out just right. So now people actually showed up for the equinox shadow. Here's the equinox shadow. Again, you can see there's a little gap in the bronze, represents that day. And I will boastfully point out how the shadows are all cast on those parts and how symmetrical they are. Yeah. And then here's December, and nobody showed up for that one. But I did. And there it is at the other end of the plaza pavilion. This interests me a lot, and I hope to do more work like this in the future. Oh, look! So this is three-liner, your piece on the Monroe Harbor in Chicago, where it was until just about a month ago. It's amazing. Some of you took the trip to Chicago and you saw Millennium Park, and this is quite close to there. It's amazing how many people there are just milling around all the time. Once in a while I'd get a chance to go look at the piece, and there would always be people looking at it, constantly. and taking pictures of it and shooting video and posing in front of it. It's really amazing. And it's a nice thing that you're doing because it'll start happening here too. You'll have people really taking an interest in sculpture. Here's a commission I did for East Lansing, Michigan. And this was something where they put in this little fountain. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a little fountain with some benches. And then they thought, it's not doing it for us. We need something else. And so they asked artists to come up with something, and I came up with that, and we did that. Now this is a piece I did in Chattanooga. Again, it's a pavilion with columns. It's not quite done in this photo. And these columns are out of precast concrete, and they have bowls on top that are planters that have flowers in them, and they're irrigated too. They have water going up the middle. This was another piece for a university in Southern Illinois, in Carbondale. My tour isn't done yet, but I'm about halfway through. And this was a new library, and in this case, I made the sculpture a spinning piece that mounted on the wall of a glass wall, so you can see that from inside and from outside. And then there's also a sort of a mobile piece that hangs inside this atrium. In this photo, it isn't up yet because I haven't finished it, but I'm going to show you another picture. And the two pieces are connected. There's a close-up of the outside piece. So now here's a picture of the inside piece, and it's a really long vertical thing, and all those parts revolve. And then what I did was I made the outdoor piece, there's a main shaft that actually pierces through the wall, and then there's a chain drive that goes up by the glass up to the ceiling and connects to a shaft. The shaft goes across the ceiling. You can see it up there at the top. And then there's there's a right angle gear drive that this hangs from. So when the piece outside turns, this turns. They're connected. I love a challenge. And this was the hardest thing I've ever done. It just was so hard. Particularly making this indoor part because it's really big and my studio isn't really big enough. So I had to make each piece sort of individually. But then how do you balance it? Because you have to hang them all together to balance it. And it was such a challenge.
How long did that take?
Way too long. It was a long process because they actually brought me in before they finished the building, while they were still designing the building. So that was about 4 years. And then the actual working on the sculpture went on off and on for over a year. And then this is a piece that I did in Toledo, Ohio, and this was a challenging commission because it was a memorial. They built a big new bridge over the Maumee River for Interstate 280, and a very ambitious and quite beautiful bridge. And in the process of that, there was a tragic accident, and 4 guys were killed. And it was a huge ordeal for the community, and so they decided that they would like to do some sort of a memorial. And over time, they decided that would be a sculpture, and eventually I got the commission to create this piece as a memorial. Not only a memorial to the men who were lost, but also to the bridge and the whole thing. And this was a big community effort. They raised, initially this was a $100,000 commission, and I'm telling you this because you're in the business, or should be, are going to be. And so they had $100,000, and then once we sort of got going with this, they realized that they wanted to do more and really develop a nice plaza and some planting and benches and kind of fix up this park. So ultimately, this ended up costing, I don't know, $230,000 or something by the time they finished the whole thing. And they were able to raise all that money in about 2 years. And, it was just people doing it. And it was great. The iron workers who worked on this bridge and, survived this accident, volunteered when we installed this and came out on the job site and helped me put the piece up, which was really nice. And there's some video of this on YouTube. Is there a link on my website? I think so. So here is of sort of the major axial view where you look through the sculpture, and in the distance you see the pylon. It's one of those single pylon bridges that has the cables. And then also this bridge has glass panels on the sides of the pylon that go all the way up, and the glass panels are lit with LED lights that change color. So at night, this thing is like a wild, colorful, ever-changing, it's pretty fantastic.
Where is it?
In Toledo, Ohio. And again, it's like the double motif where you have twins. That's one of my things. Wow, that's pretty long and lean. I wonder if that picture got a little distorted somehow. This is just a piece I did in Chicago. I was telling Cheryl about this. In Chicago, we have these shows where artists are offered a small stipend and money is raised in the community. And these shows start out like maybe 10 sculptures or something. And over the years, they grow. This piece was in one of those shows, I think the 12th annual in 2012. And the organization that sponsored it also acquired it. And so it will be a permanent thing in Chicago. And a lot of these sculptures have been acquired by their sponsors. And so more and more, there are pieces like this all around the city, which is pretty nice. And then this is a piece I did in Skokie, Illinois, which is right outside of Chicago. And they also have been they were mavericks in outdoor sculpture and have their own sculpture park, and that's got something like 70 pieces in it. And mostly artists just loan their work, they pay a stipend, and it's been very successful. I was involved in that in the very first show, which was in '87 or something. And it's been going strong ever since, and they came back to me in 2012 and commissioned me to make this permanent piece at their new train station. And in Skokie now, everybody's really accustomed to sculpture, and they all love it because they've been having it around for a long time. So eventually you can just brainwash everybody. And then this is a model of something that I'm working on right now that's going in Memphis. And again, the theme of the columns and two towers with the kinetic things on top. I will be installing the columns on the site the week after next. And they're being made in Chattanooga by a precast place. And then the rest of it will go up probably, don't tell them, but probably not till spring. that they're building right on the Mississippi in downtown Memphis. It's basically right at the end of Beale Street, where Beale Street meets the river. Was sort of a part of the riverbank that was just a bunch of weed trees and not so swell. And what they've done is created a riverboat terminal there, where riverboats come and go, and there's a lot of riverboat tourism now. And then this whole big park is also a terminal. And the sculpture is basically where the axis of Beale Street meets the axis of the park. They sort of intersect under the sculpture. And that is a catfish in the middle. Oh, here's a rendering of the park, and the sculpture is going in that sort of trapezoidal plaza there. So that's pretty exciting. And then for something completely different, a few years ago, I started making some indoor kinetic work. And this is kind of a combination of what I do with my furniture and what I do with sculpture, because the elements of this thing are all forged. I do a lot of forging steel. I have power hammers, and I have been doing this for years. And so all of these components for this are made out of forged steel. And if ever you're in Chicago, come and I'll give you a demonstration. And so these pieces, basically, they're balanced to be very, very sensitive, and they are indoors, and just air currents from HVAC make them move. So it's not dramatic motion, but they do move. Or if you just walk by. And actually, I have a gallery in Santa Barbara that sells these and has been doing pretty well with them. So they're like this big. That piece is maybe this tall.
Could they be for outdoors as well?
No, it doesn't work because the problem is that anything you do for outdoors, if you want it to hold up well, you have to really limit the amount of surface area. And so these would just blow over outdoors. But indoors, you need big surfaces because the wind currents are so slight. So it's really two very different environments. Oh, and then I was just going to show you a few pictures of my furniture. I have a double life. I also make furniture. And I've done it since I was a kid, and somehow I can't stop. So this is one of our tables, a very sculptural table.
Is that wood or is that metal?
That's all steel. So this is all made out of solid cold-rolled steel bars. It's pretty darn heavy. And then we polish the steel and we use a hand-applied patina to give it a rich and beautiful finish. And my furniture is represented in showrooms in a number of different furniture markets. This is a recent piece. It's a dining table. And this piece is forged, so all of the components in this piece are manipulated by heating them red hot and drawing them into different shapes. So they're tapered and they're curved, and then also that gives it the texture. I have a sort of a bunch of different things I do. Texture. And that's it. Thank you.